let's pray this works because we have the video broadcasting live for, well, technically the second time, but it's actually going to be the first time that hopefully we all get it to work. I'm joined by Dude You Crazy Editor-in-Chief Andrew Hall. Andrew, what's going on?
Not much, Chad, the intern. We are excited to try some new things. We've got a new partnership in media, so we think we're going to be able to actually do video podcasts as well as the standard audio. So that's what we're trying out. We had a bit of a snafu last week, so we apologize for no podcasts. Hate to have let you down, but we did in fact record one, but we couldn't get the technology to work, so I guess we were more let down than anyone. But here we are. We're giving it a go, and we're without Daniel Palmer today. Chad, what's the deal with Palmer?
Well, Palmer is actually in Atlanta. We could have even tried to do this thing live, but after bragging about the setup he has in his parents' house where his coffee was free, turns out his internet connection is not up to snuff, so Hall and I, for the first time ever, are going to try to take this thing ourselves.
That's right.
It doesn't quite have the same ring to it, but let's see what we got.
Yeah, not only that, but we're letting Chad take this bad boy for a spin as the host, which could get interesting because we have no agenda. Our real objective today is just to see if we can get the technology to work, but should be fun. The first ever podcast I recorded was just me talking into my iPhone, and that one turned out miserable, so this one's got to be better.
Hey, you know what? We're about 20 in now, so I think it can only get better.
Surely.
But then again, you never know. Well, I would say the lack of a Dude You podcast actually might be somewhat to blame for the loss last week. Is there? Am I crazy?
I'd like to blame it on that. A couple things. I wrote a column on DudeYouCrazy.net in which I kind of said I didn't know who to really put this game on. Wanted to blame the defense, but at the same time, the defense didn't turn the ball over 4 times, and I wanted to blame the offense, but at the same time, you're missing a lot of starters, and I wanted to blame the injuries. You can't really blame the injuries when your offensive line was totally healthy and Aaron Murray couldn't find time to throw the ball. Then I wanted to blame the coaches, but this wasn't like some Georgia games where you just feel like the players come out relatively unenthused. It wasn't like that. So then I blamed the fact that I wore the wrong shirt. We're 4-0 this year when I wear my black Georgia coaching polo, which ironically is the same one Mark Richt had on this week. And I busted out the old school Matthew Stafford jersey, which is now a Blake Sailors jersey. And I think that might have been part of it, as well as the fact that we could not publish a Dude You podcast. I think we're to blame for that.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that pretty much everyone's culpable. I mean, I didn't arrive at the game until halftime because I was at a wedding the night before and woke up at about 11 o'clock in West Atlanta. But you know what? I really don't know what else there is to say except Missouri played a great game. They had a great game plan to isolate their receivers on the outside and create running room between the tackles with that, and their defense played against an offense that looked like it was missing 6 of its top skill position players. I really don't want to dwell on that anymore. You want to jump into this week's games? Because
yeah, I am.
That sounds a little better.
I'm definitely in favor of moving on.
All right, well, we do have a pretty mean noon slate in the SEC this week as all of the SEC East contenders and Tennessee are actually in action right at that point. So let's jump right in with South Carolina at Tennessee. Now, Andrew, I know the Dogs had their own set of struggles in Knoxville 10 days ago. What do you see about this game that makes you think that it could end any differently for South Carolina?
I'm actually really excited about this game. I think, to hear Tennessee fans, and I was up in Knoxville for the game, and I'm from East Tennessee originally, so I know a lot of folks there. To hear them talk after the Georgia game, you would have thought that they won and that they were the favorites in the SEC East following it. Don't remind them of the score. Don't remind them that Georgia lost a ton of players. And Tennessee fans, that was as close to a victory as you can get. And I realize they hadn't had a lot of success over the last couple of years, so maybe they're clinging to that. I think this is going to be an interesting game that's going to kind of serve as a thermometer for this Tennessee program, at least within this year. Maybe that was a turning point for Tennessee, and maybe Tennessee did kind of get around the corner there, start to head upward on their trajectory, or maybe they just really took advantage of some really costly Georgia injuries, which we've seen, as Missouri demonstrated, there's definitely significant issues there when we don't have those playmakers. So I think it'll be interesting to see. South Carolina is a team that I still can't quite figure out. Having seen them in person, they don't seem like they're that good. But, with Georgia sitting on 2 losses and missing a lot of personnel, I mean, South Carolina is still very much in the hunt in the East. And not only that, but with one loss, they're sitting in really comfortable pole position given the rest of their schedule this year. They could really make some BCS noise. So I'm interested to see what happens in this game on both fronts.
Yeah, and I've got an article posting on DudeYouCrazy.net tomorrow, kind of breaking down the SEC East race a little bit and tying it back to how Georgia can salvage the season. But I just, I kind of want to pick Tennessee because I feel like it's going to be a whole lot closer than South Carolina's game at Arkansas, which you and I both picked as an upset last week.
Yeah, we were almost right?
Yeah, within 45 points, which is closer than my upset pick the week before, where I had Maryland beating Florida State. But overall, I think Tennessee probably still has the best offensive line in the SEC, but they played way over their heads against Georgia, and I just think South Carolina is going to come out and just assert either physical or just tactical dominance. Either way, I think South Carolina wins this game going away in the 10 to 13 point range.
Yeah, South Carolina's defense is starting to come around a little bit, and while everyone's busy talking about Jadeveon Clowney and whether he plays or he doesn't play, whether he produces or doesn't produce, quietly those other 10 guys on the field around him are starting to build some momentum, starting to develop. And they lost 99% of their linebacker production from a year ago, so there was going to be some learning curve, and they're starting to become that South Carolina defense that we thought they would be. And if you can't just scheme away from Clowney, not just around him, but away from him, meaning the rest of that defense begins to step up, this could be a really good team because their offense has looked a lot better than most expected. Mike Davis is a good runner. It's going to be interesting. I do think they come away with a 2-score win.
Yeah, and I think Georgia fans would be happy to have Chaz Sutton or Kelsey Quarles on our defensive line over anybody else we have on our defensive line.
I won't tell Ray Drew you said that.
Well, Ray Drew being the obvious exception because he's just a monster. But
he's playing well.
Moving right ahead, a team that we are unfortunately quite familiar with, the Missouri Tigers are up to 14th from 25th in the polls, and they're hosting another team that we're familiar with, but the last 2 years just worked out a little better, the Florida Gators.
Yes, this is interesting. Missouri, first team in the country to become bowl eligible, which was kind of interesting, and obviously their record's a part of it, but they also just played early in the day, the other day. As a Georgia fan, you got to root for Florida in this game. Missouri's got to lose too.
Louisville was bowl eligible first, there, right? Thursday night.
Actually, that's probably true. Let me see. You're right. I stand corrected. I saw that somewhere. In my defense, I was reciting an incorrect fact. I wasn't using my own research there.
That's fair. It's got to be ESPN research then.
Exactly. So one thing that's going to be interesting, I think, is just looking at this Missouri team and their schedule moving forward. It is not the most favorable one. To sit here right now and having seen what we just saw, I don't know what we can really draw about this Georgia team moving forward. A lot of it's going to depend on when Gurley and Bennett get back. But if we work on the assumption that, Georgia played a decent game last weekend, which I don't think is the assumption, but if that is the assumption, this Missouri team might be a real force. And you look at what they've got left. They've got to go Florida this week. They got South Carolina next week, both at home, though. And then, they end the season with Ole Miss and A&M, and I think they've got Tennessee, maybe Kentucky thrown in there somewhere. But this is going to be the first test. If you're a Georgia fan, you need Missouri to lose to throughout the course of this. Florida, I think, actually presents a pretty good chance for an upset. I don't know how much of an upset it would be point spread-wise, but, you've got number 22 taking on number 14. Florida's defense is tough. It's physical. I think that they can get in an edge against Missouri's offense, and I really want to see what happens to Missouri when they're not scoring points. Because you look at what they've done. I mean, their lowest scoring game of the year was 38 points. They've gone over 50 twice. They've put up several games of 41, 45, things like that. I want to see what happens, if Missouri's in a fight and they're held even under 30 points, which isn't ridiculous for any team, but if they're held under 30 points, how does their defense respond against an admittedly mediocre Florida offense?
Yeah, here are my things on that. I actually put the Missouri remaining schedule up on this screen share, so listeners, leave a 5-star review. Let me know if that works, and it will get read on air. But they got Florida, South Carolina, and Tennessee coming to Columbia, Missouri, each of the next 3 weeks. Then they also have Texas A&M at home, but they're at Kentucky and Ole Miss. I think there's a reasonable possibility that they could actually finished pretty strong. I think 2 losses is probably going to be where they land, but I think it just goes to show that you don't really write off a team based on one season where its quarterback is hurt. Now, having said that,
Yeah.
the same quarterback is hurt again. I don't think Missouri is going to find the same rhythm with Malk at quarterback that they had with Franklin. I mean, I saw a stat on SB Nation, I think it was today, where Missouri has 7 guys who have over 50 plays intended their way, which is either an attempted pass, a run, a jet sweep, a quarterback run, whatever. But, I mean, the balance on their offense really comes. I don't know if it's going to be because of James Franklin or if it's because of the scheme, but I just think they're going to run to a world of hurt without James Franklin for the second year. In addition to that, I think Florida is going to be able to run the ball on Missouri much like Georgia was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Florida will run the old 8 offensive linemen on the field at the same time against Missouri, who basically runs a Big 12 style 4-2-5, which is smaller across the board. I just think Florida is going to have more of a game like they had against Arkansas, win this one 23-17-ish range. But, definitely a game to keep your eye on this weekend, as it has obvious implications for the Bulldogs.
Mm-hmm.
Next, obviously we're going to skip the Georgia-Vanderbilt game and get some thoughts at the end because that's just the way we run. But we've got Auburn at Texas A&M. So, Andrew, Auburn's ranked this week, which, I think there's somebody who said they might be bowl eligible this year, and I'm just going to go ahead and take credit for that. It was me. It was this guy.
It was the guy that picked the Maryland upset?
Yeah. I don't think Auburn's a top 25 or even top 40 team, but they've beaten who you put in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I know about this game is I'm taking the over because Texas A&M's still giving 6.5 yards per play on defense, and Auburn's not stopping Johnny Manziel. What do you think about this game? I'm thinking like a 48-41 type, just up and down the field like A&M experienced at Ole Miss last week.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a ton of points, and the irony of that is even if this is a turnover-prone game, you've got a game where there's enough athletes on the defensive side of the ball where even if there were, say, 4 turnovers between the two teams, you still would probably see the same point output because nobody's stopping either of these offenses and they score quickly. So, let's say Auburn turns the ball over on the 40. It's not like it's going to take A&M more than 3 plays to score anyway. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to watch in this. Obviously, I'm with you. I don't think Auburn's going to stay in the top 25 very long. I think A&M wins. Something kind of, I guess, interesting is the AP poll for the first time ever has 8 SEC teams in it.
Yeah.
Ole Miss was really close to pulling off an upset, and you would have had 9 top 25 teams in the SEC, which would have been a little bit crazy. It's going to be interesting to see maybe just the caliber of this Auburn team as far as are they going to be able to keep the pace with A&M because they are an offensive-minded team and they do have a somewhat weak defense, but I don't think their offense is really on the same par as even Ole Miss's, for instance. And Ole Miss was able to kind of go blow for blow. I thought Ole Miss should have eaten the clock a little more late in that game and would have had a shot. Yeah. But it's going to be interesting to see how Auburn does. I do think it's going to be a shootout. I think A&M wins. I've got A&M winning maybe by 10 points, but also being one of those games that with 3 or 4 minutes left could go either way.
Well, there's one Auburn game that wasn't like the rest of the others this year, and that was at LSU.
Right.
So you kind of wonder if it was the rain that kind of kept Nick Marshall out of the game in the first half, or if it was the hostile environment which he will face in Aggieland. So I think those, just all of those factors are just going to make it definitely an interesting game to watch because, again, with Georgia implications, we need that win at Auburn. But I think it's going to be just a high-scoring, very similar to the Texas A&M Alabama game, but a fun one to watch. But I think A&M.
Yeah, I'll start saying this a whole lot for the rest of the season, especially as the first BCS poll comes out this week. If you're a Georgia fan, you're actually rooting for Auburn big time this week. You want Auburn ranked as high as possible, or at least ranked when we take them on at the end of the year. If they could upset A&M, which, again, I don't really anticipate happening, but if they could do that, Auburn probably has a similar springboard up the poll as what Missouri saw this week. Maybe not all the way to 14, but I could see them getting in the top 16, 17 in that range.
Yeah, I think there are merits to both sides of that, but you've got to play somebody who has beaten a few teams, and I think an undefeated Alabama team that handed A&M or LSU it's only one of its only one or two losses might bode even better. But that's a complicated debate that we can never really get into because I don't think Georgia's going to the national championship game, as you will see tomorrow.
Agreed.
Uh, LSU at Ole Miss. I will tell you this: if ever I wanted to be an Ole Miss student, this would be the year for it. They've already had home games against Texas, Texas A&M. Now LSU comes to town. That sounds like a lot of fun tailgating on the Grove. Andrew, have you ever been to the Grove?
I actually have not. One of the few SEC places I have not made a trip to. I think a Dude You Crazy field trip might be in order next year, or maybe even just some random weekend this year. But I have not been to the Grove. You?
I have not. That and LSU were the two games I wanted to see as road games on Georgia's schedule this year, just because I have a much better excuse to get off and do those this year. The road schedule is a little underwhelming, so I'm just going to be happy with Clemson, Florida, and hopefully a trip to Atlanta for the SEC championship game.
There we go.
But sooner or later, yeah, I would say a Dude You Crazy road trip to Oxford would be much in order. As far as this game goes, though, Ole Miss isn't stopping anybody. In LSU's offense, they scored 17 against Florida, but the total yards would indicate that they, did not score as many as they should have. I think LSU wins this game running or walking away, running away, going away. Jeez. That is the first ever video mess up by me. Sorry about that, guys. I think LSU wins it going away. What you got?
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, here's the thing about LSU's offense. Even given their low output against Florida, I mean, Florida's defense is incredible. They're giving up, I think, 13 points a game. They're in the top 5 or 6. I remember looking earlier this week in scoring defense. I think I want to guess they were number 4, but I can't recall. I know they were in the top 6, but that's a really good defense. So a 17-point effort against them might sound laughable, but when you do the math, I mean, they put up 25% more points than what the average team is scoring, which is a good output, especially in an SEC game. Ole Miss, I don't know where I stand on them. I'm still not really sold out. They've had a tough schedule. They might have the toughest schedule in the country, although Georgia's is looking increasingly more difficult as Missouri and Auburn rise into the rankings. But Ole Miss has a really tough schedule. I felt better about them after seeing them upset Vanderbilt, but now I feel like Vanderbilt is not what I thought they were going to be heading into the season. So either I was wrong about Vandy, excuse me, first voice crack on video there. So either I was wrong about Vandy or I was wrong about Ole Miss, and I kind of think I was wrong about Vanderbilt. I don't think Vandy's what I thought they would be. So I haven't been terribly impressed with Ole Miss. Obviously, I recognize they played a heck of a game against Texas A&M. Great game, really could have won that game. But, I mean, that's kind of how SEC play is. You can win a game like that. I mean, look at what we know about Georgia now. We've seen their offensive line struggle in 2 games. Do I know definitively that Georgia's better than LSU, for instance? I really don't. I saw it in person, and I saw Georgia win. But any team can get up for any given game, and I'm kind of wondering if that wasn't the case for Ole Miss last week. And losing that close one may really kind of deflate them, whereas if they'd won, they might be riding high and have a lot of momentum and a lot of confidence this week.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the October just brutalizing that the schedule gave them, where they played Alabama, Auburn, A&M, and now LSU. I mean, that could demoralize the New England Patriots, although the Patriots would beat all 4 of those teams.
Maybe.
It opens up for them after this. They have Idaho, then they have a November where really only Missouri looks like a team that is also on the middle to upper tier of the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't see I don't see Ole Miss being a contender when November comes around. So I've got LSU finishing off what is just a heinous October for Ole Miss, but an encouraging one because they acquitted themselves well against A&M, lost a close one at Auburn, which is turning out not to be such a bad thing. And if they can put up a good showing against LSU, I think you've got to be excited about their future.
Yeah, absolutely. They are still obviously a very young team. They've got talent on both sides of the ball, which is a thing you rarely see, especially with young teams. Usually you say, man, this young offense is going to be great, or this young defense is going to be great. They've got a whole lot of talent around, so I think they've definitely, to your point, bright future for sure.
Yeah, I would have to say that is probably the case. Just one more we've got today. We've got Arkansas at Alabama. I remember going into last year, this was supposed to be the big matchup, and then pours one out for Daniel Palmer here, but our favorite subject of the Dude You podcast, Bobby Petrino, got in a motorcycle accident or something.
Something along
And
those lines.
unfortunately, that game never lived up to its billing. I don't think this year is going to be much different, although Arkansas does not quite have the cachet that they did last year. Hall, what you got with Arkansas, Alabama?
Yeah, not a whole lot on the Arkansas front. I was a little disappointed with what happened last week. I think, admittedly, maybe I was looking for the upset. I think I said on the podcast that never aired, if I can get over 1/3% confident in an upset, I pick the upset. It's a lot more fun that way. But I was a little upset, or I wouldn't say upset. I'm not that invested. A little disappointed in what I saw from Arkansas last week. But a lot of that may be South Carolina being better than I anticipate. But, I don't see a whole lot of cause for optimism from Arkansas heading into this one game, and that's a very short-term thing. I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited over the long term. But Alabama's starting to put it together. Alabama still, I like Oregon a lot, but I still think Alabama's probably got the potential to be the best team in the country. And I think we're going to continue to see them get closer and closer to that as they put every phase of the game together.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on pretty much all points there. Alabama is going to continue to improve. I think they were honestly just bored the first couple of games of the season, but if anybody can fix that, I'd say it's the evil genius Nick Saban. I've got Alabama winning, in a very workmanlike 31-7 fashion as they usually do. And with that, I would say let's turn the clock right back to noon. We have the Georgia Bulldogs going to one of my favorite cities in the country, Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
While I will not be in attendance, I will be obviously watching that game with a lot more keen interest than the rest of the strong SEC noon slate. Hall, what you got any good Nashville stories from your undergrad years or even more recently?
Nashville, great town. I will say I don't know if I have any great stories. I will say what I really like about Nashville is honestly the really cliche touristy places are actually somewhat tolerable. You can go down on Broadway there, so to speak, and hit the cheesy honky tonks, and it's actually a decent time. You can get a cheap barbecue sandwich, you can get a cheap PBR, have a good time there. So Nashville's great. It's a good place. I agree. One of my favorite southern cities. It's close to Kentucky if you want to head up and get some bourbon while you're in the area. And Tennessee, if you are not the driver, you're allowed to drink in a car, which is kind of a perk that you can take advantage of if you're road tripping up there. But yeah, Nashville is great.
Well, I did not know that about the state of Tennessee. That changes everything. I've been down on Broadway one time. Palmer would want to call me out with stories about that if he were on the podcast, so thank God he's not. But, yeah, any place where you can drink for cheap in a major metropolitan area, which I guess we're going to qualify Nashville as for purposes of the fact that we are a Southern podcast, it's one of my favorites. But going into this game, obviously we're extremely let down by pretty much every facet of the game that was played on Saturday. What are you looking for that needs to improve between Missouri and Vanderbilt? Because I think going back to playing a more traditional pro-style team is going to help a young defense be able to simplify its reads a little bit. But going in, what are you looking for to get this thing back on the right track?
Yeah, I'm really looking for the play of both lines. I was really disappointed with the offensive line last week, and I kind of touched on this briefly, but Aaron Murray's missing weapons, and he didn't have time back there. That's a really bad thing as he's trying to develop kind of a rhythm with the young receivers like Reggie Davis, And even guys like Rantavius Wooten, who have been around for a long time but haven't really been as high in the rotation, the guy needs some time. And I don't think he had that against Missouri. And some of that, I think, falls on freshman running backs who are unable to pick up somebody who's coming through that line.
Yeah.
And I understand that, and I don't think that's necessarily their fault. I think that's just an age and maturity thing. I don't think anybody thought J.J. Green, who many thought would be a defensive back coming into college, no one anticipated him being the starter at midseason of his true freshman year at running back. So it's hard to blame him or the coaching staff for that, but that was just kind of the scenario. So the offensive line has got to pick up its weight there, and I think they'll be able to do that against Vanderbilt. I mean, Vanderbilt's got a decent pass rush. I think they have 13 sacks on the year.
Mm-hmm.
They're decent. They're not incredible. They don't have anybody, I don't think, with more than 2 sacks, so there's no one guy, but they are persistent, and a lot of that comes from, if we're flipping sides of the ball, a lot of it comes from practicing against a really disciplined Vanderbilt offensive line. That's something that James Franklin's teams have always, kind of prided themselves on, is their blocks, and they do some stuff. They do a lot of low blocking, some stuff that's maybe questionable if you play defensive line, but I don't play defensive line, and they aren't flagged for it, so I can't complain about it. But really want to see on Georgia's defensive side, you've got a decent quarterback who's hitting 2/3 of his passes and has maybe the best receiver in the country in Jordan Matthews. We're going to have to get pressure on Austin Carter-Samuels if we're going to limit Jordan Matthews at all, because he's going to be able to pick apart any of our young defensive backs. And I was really impressed with Shaq Wiggins. I thought he played really aggressively, played well last week against Missouri, made some good tackles in open field, but he's not going to be able to cover Jordan Matthews. I mean, nobody's been able to. He's got over 700 yards in 6 games this year. So the only way you're going to disrupt that really is getting pressure on him. So I'm looking for Ray Drew, who we mentioned earlier. Ray Drew's got 5 sacks in the last 3 games. He needs to be back there. Garrison Smith needs to be back there. A guy we talked a lot about in the offseason, Jordan Jenkins, hadn't done quite as much as we thought he would. And admittedly, I haven't watched him a whole lot in an isolated film study, so to speak, but I haven't really seen the motor from him that I kind of expected to see there, something that Jarvis Jones was at least able to do selectively last year. So I'm expecting improved play, long story short, and I guess it's already been long, but improved play from both line units.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to respond to a lot of your points because I feel like all of yours were really good, and I really have nothing much more to add. First, with the Georgia offense, I thought in the first half it came out too conservative, trying to get cute underneath, trying to run in 2nd and long. And it's almost like the coaching staff said at halftime, we're going to scrap that game plan, but while we get more vertical, we're going to start substituting the offensive line with no rhyme or reason liberally, and it makes no sense. And that's when you see Missouri start to get pressure on Aaron Murray. I mean, Michael Sam, the Missouri defensive end, now has, I think, 11.5 sacks on the season. I mean, he's a great player in his own right, but, I mean, I think we made him look a lot better than he actually was because we went back to the same type of rotation that we did in the 3rd quarter of the opening game against Clemson, where we weren't moving the ball because Aaron Murray was on his backside within a 2.5 seconds. To the next point about Jordan Matthews, he's going to be a problem. I just hope we have our own Matthews back in the secondary to bracket over him, because what really concerns me is the vertical game more so than the underneath with a rangy receiver like that. And Carter Samuels has exceeded my expectations as a quarterback, which worries me a little bit. And I realize, listeners, I apologize. We were just both going all over the place here.
Yeah.
But this game, I can't really say it doesn't worry me.
Yeah.
I think Vanderbilt's going to get their points, but a lot of the guys you said that need to step up, even Chuck Oliver on Twitter this morning was taking Jordan Jenkins to task, asking, basically, when is he going to show up this season?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fair question because Leonard Floyd has basically exceeded him as the Jarvis of this defense, when Jenkins over the 2nd half of the season was as good as Jarvis, at least statistically.
Yeah, I think
there's just a lot going on with this team that I don't like right now. None of it is chemistry or anything related, but the defense isn't stopping anybody, and the offensive line has ceased to stop people. And receivers aren't playmakers. The current running backs aren't playmakers. There's just a laundry list of problems. We can try to knock them out individually if you want, but you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I've been real disappointed with the development of the defense, and I love the idea of Todd Grantham. I think I've said that on here before. But it seems like every year there's a little bit of an excuse for this Georgia defense. The first couple of years he didn't have the players for the 3-4 scheme. Last year the defense drastically underperformed, and kind of the general story, and I don't know how much of this was put out by him and by the Georgia coaching staff and how much was just kind of assumption by non-official media and talking heads. I guess we're talking heads now that you can see our heads, but folks like us. But kind of the story last year was, everybody was looking ahead to the NFL draft and not playing for themselves. Well, this year the excuse, across the board is we've got a really young defense and we got a lot of true freshmen playing from, especially in the defensive secondary. And what I don't quite understand is where are the sophomores and the juniors in the secondary? I don't quite understand if Todd Grantham is both good schematically and in developing players, why it matters that people went pro after their third or fourth year. I mean, that's how things work. That's how this league works. You stay for 3 years, you leave. I don't understand why people in their second and third year who are still at Georgia aren't developing. And I think another guy, we've mentioned Jordan Jenkins, who didn't quite develop as much as we thought, at least hasn't performed as much as we thought he would. Another guy in the secondary is a guy, Damian Swan, who we all recognized heading into this season probably benefited by having a lot of talent around him last year. But Damian Swan, I mean, I don't know how long he's going to be able to continue to start. And if he doesn't improve and remains a starter in Georgia's secondary, I think that's a really harsh indictment of this Georgia defense and probably this Georgia program as a whole. And that's really concerning to me.
Yeah, and in my piece that's going up tomorrow, I kind of touched on that. I had 3 things that Georgia could do to salvage the season, and one of them was develop some young talent. And I had to go on Scout.com and pick out names from guys in their second and third year in the program because I've never really followed Georgia recruiting. Mm-hmm. But, it's just like that Georgia Dream Team class outside of a few big names is a black hole, and then last year's class is a bunch of redshirt freshmen that almost immediately have gotten jumped by true freshmen that are seeing the field this year. So, I mean, I think you're definitely onto something, that there's a cause for concern just into the depth of those classes. I see solid names like Xavier Ward and a couple of the other guys whose names escape me on the offensive line, but as far as the defense, it's almost like Grantham could have said, you know what, well, we have Jarvis Jones, we have John Jenkins, we have Bakari Rambo, everybody this year. We're not going to worry about recruiting quality replacements for these guys on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, as it relates to this game, I just hope that the system can be simplified a little bit just to get players in the right places where they're swarming the ball, because there were just numerous times last week where the defense was bailed out by Josh Harvey Clemens being in the right place in the flats, making a tackle in the open field, that if he doesn't make that play, that's a 30 or 40-yard completion or run. But, I would rather have the team just rely on putting hats on the ball and swarming the football than some complicated scheme that they don't understand. That's my concern going into the week for this defense, is that Vanderbilt can just outsmart our defense based on players who are playing on that side of the ball do not play effectively unless they are, if you have to think when you're playing defense, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really bothered me is if you look at the bright spots of the defense, ironically, a lot of them are in the secondary. I've been really unbelievably impressed with Harvey Clemens when he's out there. I've been impressed with Trey Matthews when he's been out there. Shaq Wiggins has come out of nowhere the last 2 or 3 weeks and looked really, really good. But the common thread between those 3 guys, when they look good, they're reacting. They're not thinking. Far too often, you're seeing a safety out there on the field not moving. And that really concerns me, especially, and you saw that against Missouri several times, especially the wide receiver pass comes to mind right after Mock came into the game. Mm-hmm. And I get that's a trick play, but what I don't understand is it wasn't that the safety was out of position. It was that he was out of position because he never moved from snap to pass by the receiver. It wasn't like he ran up in run pursuit. It wasn't like he was playing run defense. It wasn't like he was in the box. He just didn't move. And that's
Was
the
that
most frustrating thing, and that seems like a sign of a defense that's thinking too much rather than just swarming the ball, like you're saying.
Mauger or Moore? Because I remember watching both of them do
That
that
was
about
more.
20 yards past the line of scrimmage over the course of the game. And
They
just
both
for the
did.
record, I did not rewatch this game. I was too frustrated. I will say,
Yeah.
to one of the guys who you just gave credit to on that play, Wiggins ran with the guy the whole way, had him
Yeah.
covered well. The
safety should have been over top.
Yeah, the receiver just unfortunately was 6'5", 220 and made a better play.
And that's something, though, if the safety moves and comes over top, then not only is Wiggins, rewarded for being in position, because he was right with him. It could have been pass interference on Wiggins, to his credit. And that's a backhanded compliment, but really, I mean, he was right there. If you have a safety coming over top, he either blows up that receiver with a hit or makes a play on the ball while the other guy's preoccupied, or at least makes the throw tougher. And instead, the safety was kind of planted on about the 10-yard line watching.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different game, too, and I agree with you completely on the safety play. Harvey Clemens really is becoming more of kind of a seventh or eighth man in the box as kind
He's
of
a lot like
safety
Ogletree was
linebacker.
his first year.
Yeah, and I mean, he was actually recruited, or he was at least listed as a linebacker, but with that, you've got to have two safeties to be successful on defense. And without Trey Matthews, I think the lack of him has made a big difference. If we get him back this week, I'm going to feel a lot better.
Yeah.
But I still think I don't feel good enough to say Vanderbilt's going to score less than 24 points.
Yeah, I do think that this can be a game that Georgia can simplify in a lot of ways. I mean, Vanderbilt doesn't have the weapons that Missouri has. Vanderbilt probably doesn't have the weapons that Tennessee has. So I do think this is something where I would love for the game plan to involve something along the lines of everyone keep an eye on Jordan Matthews and start seeing a little more swarming, so to speak. And at the end of the day, everything we've just said, I think, comes into play in this game. That if we're standing there thinking on defense, Georgia really can lose this game. Doesn't matter what the offense does. Doesn't matter if Gurley's back. Jordan Matthews is 102 yards away from being the SEC's all-time leading receiver. And that's with 6 games left in the season and him receiving less than 200 yards his freshman year. I mean, he's he's the best receiver statistically this conference has ever seen. And if you don't think that he is, licking his chops over this game and Georgia's secondary, you're totally wrong, because this is a game where if Carta Samuels has any time and Jordan Matthews does his thing, I mean, he can just run wild. I mean, really, a 200-yard game isn't out of the question.
Yeah, and just to Matthews' credit, I mean, he's never played with an NFL quarterback.
No.
He doesn't play in a pass-heavy system like maybe a Michael Crabtree did at Texas Tech, and he's still putting up those numbers. I mean, against SEC defenses that are bracketing him.
Everyone knows he's the guy.
I mean, he is an incredible player, and I expect to see him taken very early in the draft in 2014. Moving on to our offense, I'm going to ask you a question that you have asked me numerous times. Who do you expect to see to step up on the offensive side of the ball this week?
Reggie Davis. I think Reggie Davis is a guy that there was a couple plays last week where he looked open and Murray didn't see him or didn't choose to throw to him. And Murray kind of said something I saw in an interview, I think it was with Seth Emerson. Murray said something about how he should have had more confidence in his younger guys and kind of gone with the chemistry that they spent time last week building. I think they've got another week under their belt, and it's hard to blame Murray. He's a fifth-year guy throwing to a guy who's in his 5th game actually playing. So it's hard to blame him for not, throwing the ball that way a little bit more, taking some chances. But Reggie Davis is our best athlete remaining at the receiver position. He's not as big as Chris Conley. He maybe doesn't have the hands, but he is the guy who could come in, contribute now, and long-term, make a play for the starting spot of, say, a Malcolm Mitchell or Justin Scott Wesley next year. He's a guy that I really think has that level of talent just in his speed. And we've seen him. He's the Georgia record holder for the longest receiving touchdown at 98 yards against North Texas. So he's got that athleticism. He's a guy that I just think not only do I expect him to step up, but I think he has to step up.
And if I recall correctly, he had one pretty key drop on a 2nd or 3rd down pass on the sidelines.
Yep.
But, Murray was never really looking his way even prior to that. So I think that's probably about as good of a call. If you get them back to where Murray and TK were throwing passes in the dark after practice last year, maybe you see Murray rely on him a little more because I think for this offense to really be effective going forward, it's going to need the vertical threat of somebody besides Chris Conley. Rantavius Wooten's not going to get past you deep. Rhett McGowan's not going to get past you deep. So I think Reggie Davis is very key. My key offensive player is pretty simple. We need to get Todd Gurley back.
Yeah.
He is an absolute difference maker, and I don't really think I need to elaborate on that too much. I think with Gurley, I feel comfortable that we win the game. Without him, I think we're in another dogfight.
Yeah, I think one thing that's underrated about Gurley, and I realize it's hard to maybe measure the direct impact of Gurley being out just because his injuries coincided with so many others.
Yeah.
But Gurley gives you the ability to run the ball so effectively on first down. He gives you the ability to block in passing downs. I think he's a better sell on the play action just because he's a much bigger threat on the ground. I think all of those things add up. You look at in games that Gurley's played in this year, we've scored almost 42 points per game. In games without him, we're right at 30, and that includes an overtime period. And I'm not ignorant. I realize, the last game especially, we were missing the majority of our playmakers. But Gurley is a difference maker. Anybody that's in Heisman contention as a sophomore from the running back position on a team that has a fifth-year senior at quarterback who's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, any running back that can be kind of the Heisman favorite early in the season from his team, that is kind of tells you the caliber of the player he is and how much teams have to prepare for him. I think I kind of said this last week. I think I dress him no matter what. Even if he's banged up, last week they were saying he was able to run in a straight line well, but was unable to cut. I mean, maybe I'm ignorant, but I'd almost put him out there on one play just as a kind of as a con man, let him just run an outside screen and see how many players follow him.
I don't really hate the idea. The thing about Gurley is watching him this year and then comparing him to any other running back that's been on the field for the Dogs. I mean, good gracious, he's bigger than all of them. He's faster than all of them, and he's got better vision than all of them. I mean,
Yeah.
The heavier he gets and still retains his speed. I hate to invite this comparison, but he looks like Adrian Peterson did in college. And when you miss that, I mean, ask the Minnesota Vikings, if you're missing that kind of weapon, it makes a huge difference in what you can do offensively. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. I need to hear a prediction from you on Georgia at Vanderbilt at noon from Nashville.
Yeah, I feel, as we've kind of touched on, I'm not overly confident in this game. I will say there's two things that have to change for me to be confident in any game moving forward, maybe with the exception of App State. But until Georgia, one, gets Gurley back, and two, demonstrates consistent improvement in the defense, I'm not going to feel real confident about any game. And that goes for this game. That goes, obviously, for the Florida game. That goes for the Georgia Tech game. Kentucky's a little bit of a different story, but, if we don't have Gurley back for Kentucky, for instance, and I don't think that's going to be the case, but if we didn't have Gurley back, I don't know that I feel that confident about the Kentucky game just because I like the idea that we can lean on him and kind of spell a defense. So if Gurley's back, that's a huge difference maker. I think Georgia wins this game no matter what, but Gurley could be the difference between a 7-point win and a 17-point win.
And I thought you were just going to hedge the winner based on the Gurley caveat, which I'm going to start calling it the Gurley caveat, because I'm totally about to hedge on the Gurley caveat. Georgia wins 38-21 if Todd Gurley suits up and gets 20 touches. If Todd Gurley does not play at all, Vanderbilt wins 31-27.
Wow.
Just one last point on Georgia Vanderbilt. How many times have you gotten James Franklin, Vanderbilt coach, and James Franklin, Missouri quarterback, confused in the past 2 months?
Often. I was actually, I do some writing on BleacherReport.com, plug for them, even though we don't benefit, but check it out. I tried to get a quote from James Franklin on anything, meaning Vanderbilt's coach, and I searched James Franklin, and all I could find were all the quotes about James Franklin, Missouri's quarterback. and his shoulder injury. So it's very frustrating. I've never seen them both in the same place in person. So I think that's something that's going to need to be addressed sooner or later. Maybe that means I need to go to a Missouri-Vanderbilt matchup sometime. But I guess I've kind of missed my chance in that because Franklin's a senior, I believe. I may never see those two men at one time in person. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm not sure that they're two different people.
Well, if DudeYouCrazy.net or the Dude You podcast had made it big time, we could have gotten credentialed access to the SEC media days and probably made that happen. I think I might have put their photos next to each other in Dude You Crazy post.
They look
way back
alike.
in the summer. I have no idea what I said in reference to it, but as far as it goes, should we look at a couple national games? Because there's one that I'm going to have a very, very key interest in. It's going to take place only about 2 hours from where I am, and even from where you are. Florida State at Clemson. It's being called the biggest game in ACC history, which, as a North Carolina fan, I would like to take ACC historians back to 1998 when we were ranked 3 in the country and Florida State was number 1. But I digress. Who do you have in this matchup? I think we both picked Florida State at the beginning of the season as ACC champs. One would have to think that would mean Florida State would win this game. What you got?
I will say I've been impressed with Clemson a lot more than I anticipated, but I think Florida State's the better team here. I really do. I don't know that Clemson has the big game potential that Florida State has, and I know that sounds cheesy, but look at what Florida State did in the upset pick that we joked about earlier with Maryland. I mean, Florida State, they're really, really close to being a legitimate BCS contender, and they might be there. I just haven't recognized it yet. They're really, really good, and I know this game is at home for Clemson, which is a huge, huge benefit.
Yeah.
But I still think Florida State is the better team here. As I've said earlier, from a Georgia perspective, I kind of want Clemson to win because I think Clemson has the better shot of losing to their in-state rival if Georgia were to put everything together, which isn't foreseeable. Mm-hmm. And that would help Georgia in the BCS picture. But, I mean, let's be honest, I think that's a moot point for a while. But so I'd like to see Clemson win. I think it also makes Georgia look a little better. But I think Florida State's the better team here.
Yeah, and I agree with you on most of that. I mean, Jameis Winston is just out of this world. I mean, just from a pure quarterback standpoint, he would probably be the first quarterback taken in this coming year's draft.
Yeah.
I say that, well, I don't have to say probably. He would be the first quarterback taken in this coming year's draft. He's got talent all around him on the offense, even the offensive line. Florida State lost a lot of talent from their defense last year, but what prognosticators failed to notice this, going into this year was that everybody that they lost is being replaced by a guy who is higher ranked than him coming out of high school. And these guys have been on the bench. They've been to every practice for the past 2 and 3 years, and they, just like we said about the Maryland game, 63-0, that requires pretty much a perfect effort by both the offense and the defense. I think Florida State, if you put a gun to my head, I'd take them to win. I think the home field advantage could come into effect for Clemson a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that Winston has been on the road at Boston College and won once, I've got the Noles winning this game and what would amount to a shootout in the SEC, but what is kind of the norm in the rest of the country. A 45-31 type outcome would not surprise me at all because I think Sammy Watkins is going to get loose in the Florida State secondary a couple times. But it's going to be a fun one. I'm really looking forward to that being really the only 8 o'clock game I have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch that game, no doubt about it.
And just for all you viewers for the first time, this is not a Tennessee or a Clemson hat. It is a Calabash Seafood Hut hat representing my North and South Carolina beaches there a little bit. The other ranked versus ranked game I've got this week is UCLA at a Stanford team who just came off an upset loss to Utah. I've only really seen UCLA play once. That was on the road at Nebraska where they blitzkrieged them for 45 straight points.
Yep.
And I'm actually pretty excited about this game. You got any insight here?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun game. I've actually enjoyed UCLA and what they've done. I feel like we see UCLA have early season success on occasion, but this actually seems like the real deal to me. I kind of feel bad for Stanford. I think they're a much better team than what we saw last weekend, and the shame of it is I think in the Pac-12, as good as Oregon is, losing a game like that to Utah kind of eliminates a lot of the national championship hype for them prematurely. And I really like what Stanford does fundamentally. They block well, they tackle well, all that good stuff. I think Stanford wins this ball game. I think they're better than UCLA. I think, again, and a lot of it comes down to those fundamentals. But I think it will be, I think, a pretty entertaining game.
Yeah, and I hate that Stanford lost too mostly for the fact that I picked them to play Alabama in the national championship game this year.
I think a lot of people did.
They could climb back into it. You know, their strength of schedule is such that it could be done. I think Stanford wins this game. I think UCLA is about to go on meet the same unfortunate fate that Washington just met, playing Stanford and Oregon back to back. Yeah, that's no fun.
Not easy.
Like I said last week on the podcast, that may have happened, but never actually happened to the public. Having to transition schemes like that from Stanford, that's going to run a mid-90s NFL, power eye, play action, look at you, then go to Oregon where they're running a play every 16 seconds. The Pac-12 should make efforts to avoid that for teams because that's just rough.
Yeah.
You got any upset picks this week? I'd say let's transition into that and then close her out.
Upset picks. Let's think. I'm trying to let me pull up a schedule. If you have one, go ahead.
All right, I've got one that is on upset watch. I wouldn't really call it a pick. And no, those who have also pulled up the schedule here, I'm not talking about Miami at the University of North Carolina on Thursday night, which I want to. On Friday night, however, Central Florida visits number 8 Louisville in a game that's really the only moderately challenging game Louisville has left on their schedule. Central Florida hung with South Carolina for most of that game, which was in Orlando and not in Columbia. But this game will be held in Louisville, and I just think Central Florida is going to stick with them and prove that Louisville's not a national title contender, which we all know they aren't. Not by beating them, but just by keeping it close for a while. What do you have with this game? Because I think it's going to be interesting, and George O'Leary once falsified a resume to get a job at Notre Dame.
This right here, for those listening, you won't be able to see this, but this is how many ranked opponents based on this week's poll Louisville will play this season.
You can see his eye through the little O his fist made, but I think it's supposed to be a 0.
It's a 0. Accordingly, this is one of the few potential upsets. I think if we're SEC fans in general, or even just fans of good football and the value of strong schedules, you have to kind of start rooting against Louisville. And for a while, it was kind of like, oh, well, Bridgewater's fun. I like watching him play, but I've watched this team play several games, and I like Teddy Bridgewater, and I like Louisville, and nothing personal against them, but they are not a top 5 team in my opinion. So I'm rooting for anybody that can kind of get them out of that BCS national championship game picture, and this is one of the few things left to kind of cling to. So I'm hoping for UCF to play well. I don't know that we can really assume anything there, but I don't know. I don't want the Louisville team that's in 27-13 ball games with Kentucky and 24-10 games with Rutgers. I don't want them in the national championship game, so I'm going to be the biggest UCF fan there is outside of actual UCF fans this weekend.
I like pretty much everything you've said. Just to add to that, I'm not a conference fanboy. I think I explained in my first post on DudeYouCrazy.net that it's ludicrous that the SEC cheers for other SEC teams because those are your recruiting rivals and teams that you have to beat on an annual basis if you want to be an elite team. I think it's ludicrous. I have some buddies who are ACC fanboys to that point, which, yes, insert anything more depressing than that, who have been saying, well, this is the first week the ACC's ever had 4 teams in the top 10. I had to look once. I had to look again. Then I realized they were talking about Louisville as the 4th team in the top 10 with the aforementioned Clemson, Florida State, and Miami being the others. And Yeah, that's pretty much my reaction. Just wow. So, with that, I'm going to make the transition into closing it out.
Oh,
Hall,
I've
do you
got
have
one.
any?
I've got an upset now.
Oh,
I've
he's
changed my mind.
all right.
All right. 2010, Iowa State, unranked, upsets number 19, Texas, on the road. 2011, the Iowa State Cyclones, also unranked, upset number 20, Texas Tech,
I'm sensing
on the
a
road.
theme.
2012, Iowa State, unranked, upsets somebody good. I can't remember who.
Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State, yes. This week, Iowa State goes to Baylor, number 12 team in the country. They're scoring 11 billion points a game. Just for the heck of it, let's go with Iowa State pulling off a big upset.
Interesting.
I have no logic behind it other than once a year they upset someone ranked. That's it.
I mean, that's linear
High-level
progression as far as I know, and that sounds pretty legit. I mean, Baylor did not look great against Kansas State, and that was a game I was excited about watching them play. Decent opposition, but it was decent opposition that had lost to North Dakota State, and they still did not look great. Did you have some? I thought you had something else.
No, that's it. I've got nothing.
Well, in that case, as it's not as exciting of a weekend for me as was last weekend, do you have anything going on that's going to make up for that?
Not a lot planned. I've got a friend, David Barry, who on occasion listens to the DudeYouPodcast. David Barry's coming in town from Philadelphia, so I think he's crashing. I do have one parting note. I don't know if I can actually get this screen share to work on your video, but let's see if this works. And for those who don't see it, you'll just have to go to DudeYouCrazy.net, and I'll post this. Are you seeing the screen right now?
I've got a black screen. It wants to switch to something.
It wants to. It wants to.
Whoa. Hold
right
on.
here, you mentioned earlier a James Franklin side-by-side.
Yep.
Right here you have Connor Shaw, quarterback of South Carolina Gamecocks, next to the guy who shot the congresswoman from Arizona. Pretty similar appearance right there, if I may say so myself.
I would say that is probably as horrifying and appropriate an ending as we could possibly have to the first ever video Dude You podcast.
I thought it was good. That was from a live blog way back in the day in which I just got bitter about Georgia getting demolished by South Carolina.
And he pulled it up that quickly for you, the folks at home.
That's pretty good.
Well, for the first video Dude You podcast and for the first one I've ever hosted, I think it went pretty well. I'm about to click this in broadcast button and see if by just we're going to keep our fingers crossed and hope this thing posts here. So
yes,
signing off. Hall, thanks for joining.
Yes, real quick, check out the site DudeYouCrazy.net. Chad Floyd, what's your Twitter handle?
Good call. The Twitter handle is at Chad_Floyd. The underscore is this little mechanism. It is not the word underscore. I mean, let's use the video technology if we got it.
Might as well. And I am DudeYouCrazy on Twitter, and that is like this. Nah, let's stop. I didn't want to spell it all out. But
yeah, thanks.
DudeYouCrazy, leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Hit subscribe. If you leave 5 stars, we will read it on the air.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Hall.
Yes, sir.